Welcome to another episode of
Megan
Law. Okay, we got our timing right. So nice of you guys to join us and to have you back here with us, listening to our rambles about human design, astrogeography, astrology. So Meg, over to you.
Hey, so we are talking about Mercury today, and I thought it's quite interesting how we've chosen Mercury. It's on a Wednesday, which is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury retrograde is currently happening. And that's actually quite relevant for me because I was born with Mercury retrograde. So I actually feel more comfortable when it's in retrograde season, because it's like I am constantly introspective, constantly thinking about things in my head. So over this period, I feel more at ease. Mercury in astrology is such a lovely one to talk about because, I mean, it's all about how we communicate. It's how we listen, how we speak, and it's logic and reasoning. It even like how we process information. Mercury really does cover off quite a bit, and going on a Mercury line can help activate that for you. So it can help you be a better listener, be a better communicator. If you're a writer or a public speaker, it really can help you speak, on a stage in an event, gives you more critical thinking and lots of other things. I don't know, how does Mercury play out in human design?
Well, when you were actually talking now, I was just thinking about how Mercury has such a bad rep. You know, we all have like partial PTSD from Mercury. And when you started talking about, just to veer a little bit off, when you spoke about finding a place that, has a Mercury line where you can read and you can speak, it sounded suddenly like Mercury was exciting. I mean, Mercury is positive in human design, but from an astrological point of view, there's always this rep of like, oh my gosh, Mercury retrograde. And I can feel myself going into the thought that I'm going to press send on an email that wasn't meant to send.
Yeah, we love to blame something. So Mercury often gets the blame.
I need Mercury in my life so I can blame them on all the faux pas.
Yeah, and I mean the challenge is that Mercury actually moves quite quickly, so it changes signs every 3 to 4 weeks, but it goes retrograde 3 or 4 times a year. So when people kind of make that meme of like, oh, my microwave is blowing up on Mercury, it's Mercury's fault. It does feel like, oh my God, didn't that just happen? Didn't we just get a Mercury retrograde? And it just happens so frequently throughout the year that it is easy to blame that guy.
It's true. Look, in human design, I was doing some deep diving, preparing for this episode, and I really immersed myself in all Ra's content around Mercury. And one of the things that resonated with me quite deeply was that he said, yes, it's traditionally the messenger of the gods, but it brings the capacity to move messages. It's really the archetype of communication, and it's related to everything. And he went further into saying, communication doesn't have to be words. Think of Hermes, it's music as well. And so I like that because there was this aspect of like, why are we always thinking of Mercury in terms of it being communication directly? Like music is communication too. Mm-hmm. So there's this aspect of this imprinting that Mercury has, because that's what communication does. It's imprints and it allows us to communicate. But when we're dealing with human design, what we're dealing with is Mercury in the context of our individual charts. And so Mercury will be placed in a different center or different gate based on the chart. Now, you also have 2 Mercuries in human design because we're a binary consciousness. And on the left-hand side, we always have the design. On the right, we have the personality. So when we're looking at our chart, we need to see, okay, well, where's my conscious Mercury, personality? And where's my unconscious Mercury, design? And so that's quite important to look at those positions, because you're wanting to see, okay, where does this sit? Because am I communicating? When I'm communicating, I'm a binary being. So I communicate from an unconscious state of being and a conscious state. So what is my design side unconsciously trying to communicate? And what is my conscious side trying to communicate? And how do these kind of marry up and look together? And that's quite like when you start to look at it like that. And then I actually went back into clients' charts and friends and family, and I looked at their Mercury, I just saw this Mercury moving and like head, ajna, base, solar plexus, emotional. And it just like, I mean, I know this knowledge before, but when I go back into this knowledge, it just, I always feel this in awe of how incredibly insightful human design can be to our understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that, because your Mercury placement is in the 12th house. And for you, it is about kind of learning on your own. And I think that like this understanding and going through all these charts and learning deep dive into human design is just like, this is where you thrive. So Mercury, yeah, it's about communication. I think what people don't, and people like to blame, you know, Mercury retrograde on when their plans get canceled, but it also rules local travel and ways of traveling. So cars breaking down or plane delays and things like that. And I think the communication that you speak of, like not just the talking, speaking, writing, but singing is key, because you know how we listen as well. It's not just how we speak, but how we in turn listen and receive that information as well.
And non-verbal, I think that non-verbal communication, which does take place between our auric types. That's what happens. You know, that's where strategy comes in, because between two auras standing next to each other, there's non-verbal communication. So Mercury is still communicating through that auric field.
Yeah. Wow. Have you been on one of your Mercury lines before?
I'm not sure where. Maybe you could just remind me where my Mercury line is.
So there's one, you have a Mercury line in America, in New York City, sort of down that coast. And then you've got one that's actually really nice, that runs through Romania and then runs down to Greece. If you've we maybe need to plan some more trips for this year.
Yeah, I actually haven't been to either of those places, but interesting that you mention it, because the other day I was thinking about New York and I was thinking about Romania.
No way. So New York is like more like if you were going with your family, because it's a Mercury line linked to home and family. So it would be like a really nice place to like have nostalgia and share memories with with family or close friends. Like maybe reunited with an old friend. The astrogeography, the thing that I like about Mercury lines, so I'm living on a Mercury line at the moment, and I think that helps me because my Mercury, when I was born, was retrograde. So I do tend to sort of struggle with communication, although everything in my chart speaks to me being able to speak well. I always feel like I'm fumbling my words all the time, and that happens a lot for me. So being on this Mercury line, I think, does help me kind of clear my thoughts a little bit better. And then the other way that you can use astrogeography is finding people that like you actually relate to. So my learning style is a little bit unconventional. I don't learn I don't know if this speaks in my human design chart, but I kind of don't learn in a normal way. It takes me a little bit longer to kind of wrap my head around concepts. And so I have used my Mercury astrogeography to find mentors or teachers on a Mercury DC line, which has helped me find, like I've done courses and things like that in an area that's literally, I'm activating that Mercury line for me. So I think that's quite interesting, because if people are wanting to learn from somebody else, and depending on their learning style, a Mercury line could actually help them find the right course or teacher.
I've never actually thought about that, because in human design, we look at learning style in terms of, you can take definition into account, you can take head and ajna, root into account, and you can look at those aspects and you can say, okay, well, a non-traditional style of learning will suit this individual, or, a more structured style. But to then take it a step further, like you're saying, and actually finding that place where geographically there's going to be the best alignment. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation, because this is about what it means to live holistically and in alignment, is when we find these energy spaces on the earth and we connect with them. Like you're even saying, remotely, we don't actually have to visit those places. It's just about connecting with them.
Yeah. And then also in astrology, like Mercury rules the third house, which is communications and it's local travel and everything. But the polarity of that is the ninth house, which is higher education and travel and publishing. So if you're a writer, going to a Mercury line could actually help you write that book, finish that book, present, do a book launch on a Mercury line, speak clearly, at a public event, and all of that comes into play. But then just looking at the ways and means and how you travel along a Mercury line, like, if your Mercury is better placed to sort of local travel, like, are you afraid of flying? That, those kinds of things could be also looked at as well.
When you said now about fear of flying, it just, anything that's fear related, my brain just moves into the spleen. And I think, is the spleen open, or, is it defined? Is it, what's happening? Is Mercury or some other gate is activated, or planets inside of the spleen? Because you and I actually both, you and I both have activations of Mercury in our spleen.
And
so
can you tell if my Mercury is retrograde? Because yours isn't. So does it show in
I mean, it's actually a very good question. So it shows your personality, Mercury, and just looking at your design. I guess I can't say for sure, to be honest with you, and it wouldn't be fair to answer that question, because I would be partially guessing it and I wouldn't want misinformation. So I'm not comfortable answering that. But what I am comfortable sharing with you is something quite interesting, actually, about the location of Mercury in your chart and what it's actually telling me. So because you have your design, so remember, design's unconscious, and that doesn't mean like, just so unconscious. It's just, that unconscious side of being. So sometimes when we just talk and then we like, all the stuff just comes out our mouth and we think, oh, where did that come from? We go, hi, that's what's happening with my design. That's my design talking.
That happens all the time.
And then we're totally conscious of what we're saying. There's a lot of conscious that goes on, like in the personality. And so your design is splenic in terms of Mercury as sitting there, and that's gate 32 in the spleen. And for you, when you have splenic awareness with a gate situated there, or planet, it means that there's intuitive aspects to it too. But for you to more specifically, if we're looking at that sort of zoomed up, it's actually about attention to detail and the potential to develop this through working through a process and paying attention to that process. And then that in detriments for you is that, like, you kind of go, like, I don't think intuitively I need to know this, and therefore you kind of bypass what's needed, and the lack of attention creates the reality that you're not really good at it, and so you don't really have that potential for it. It's like, it's quite a deep aspect there, because it's also sitting in that awareness center of that.
And do you have yours activating in the spleen as well?
Yeah, I do. And mine is all about continuity in the spleen. So if I'm looking at mine and I look at, like, okay, well, what's happening in the space? I'm seeing this, which I had to laugh. It's like, it's kind of do as I say, not as I do. And that's the hypocrisy of mine. Unconsciously, it's like, I'll just dictate what needs to be done. I'll be the leader. I'll put myself in that position. It's coming from a good place, but it's not. It's coming from an unconscious place. Sorry, that's in my throat. So it's in the design side. And I wanted to stick to the unconscious side. So, so yours is splenic in that side, mine is throat in that side. Okay. In the spleen, just to answer that question, the spleen was the personality. So it's this, like, it's this in the personality, it's the sense of, like, not wanting to be controlled. and being frustrated over being controlled, and then withdrawing when that control becomes too much. So in itself, it can be in detriment in that space. And I guess it's also where the 12th house aspect comes in, where it wants to withdraw
So
and go inward.
your Mercury placement is in Libra, which is an air sign, and mine is in Aquarius, which is also an air sign. So it's actually good support for the two of us, the way we communicate. Your communication style is you are only really comfortable sharing if you feel that, and this doesn't come off like that the intellectual discussion is high, like you because it's your communication style is very high intellect. If you're not feeling like they're on the same peer level as you struggle to feel comfortable to share your views. So if you're not, like, not to say that you're talking down to people, but if you don't feel comfortable that they know what you are trying to explain, then you'll kind of reserve your opinion. And it does make your communication style a little bit more introspective, like a little bit more reserved, because it's the 12th house, so a bit maybe you come off as being shy, but that Libra energy is actually really tactful. You're really good at explaining something to people, and sort of looking at it from different sides, different points of views. And I think I like that in terms of the support that you and our relationship works, is that mine is in Aquarius. And Aquarius is quite a tricky one to understand because it is also about intellect, and it is also like a mental and a thinking. But I think because mine is retrograde, I'm a little bit more philosophical and a bit more introspective. Mine is in my 10th house. So if you were to look at it without the retrograde, you think, oh, public speaking, and that would become comfortable for me. But actually, I tend to come across as being a little bit detached, or closed off, because we're not good. Aquarians are not good with sharing our emotions, just generally.
No, but what's relevant there is because it's in the personality Mercury, there's a fatigue that comes with your design. So, it's this like, in this openness that you have, and gate 13, it's in the G center, and that's also about like listening, collecting stories, being there, people sharing. And so you've got this openness can actually like lead you to feeling physically exhausted and then wanting to have time to withdraw, this need for silence. And that openness in you too can also lead to a vulnerability as well, so it puts you in a vulnerable space.
And I think Mercury is, along with all the communication styles and the other things we talked about, it's about adaptability as well. So how do we adapt to certain situations as well? So that I find that quite relevant as well.
I think too, to mention that, our design Mercury, so design, always remind everyone, unconscious, the design side of the chart, it gives you that deep insight as to where there seems to be this consistent theme in you that needs to be expressed, while at the same time your personality doesn't also know why it really understands or accepts, or that there seems to be this theme that's trying to get it across. So when you're looking at the design Mercury, you can also see within yourself that there is so much of what we call our life, and it's in this almost like this life is the deep limitation of only being identified with our personalities. So this whole life that we have, this whole life, that's the capacity to communicate, and the capacity to communicate is binary, that being the design, the personality. So being able to communicate properly is about looking at the personality and the design Mercury in your chart, understanding that, and then seeing how these two are kind of juxtaposed against each other, and are they operating correctly? Because if they are, the larger theme will be communicated more successfully. And that, we really, like, our purpose is not to be limited by one side of this equation or the other. And we can often become stuck in being limited by the one side of the equation or the other. And that equation is design or personality. So we want the balance between the two to understand, like, how's the unconscious trying to speak to the conscious, and how's the conscious getting that through.
Yeah, and I think that's where traveling to an astrogeography line that's for your Mercury can help bring that out for you. So I feel like going to, like, this line in Romania is a Mercury AC line for you. And so it is actually this ability to speak and be heard on that line. And it's linked to your North Node because there's a node line there as well. So I feel like this journey to accepting your communication style, it helps you speak with more flow, with more ease, with more just naturalness to it, which sometimes is maybe like in the 12th house, your natural placement is sometimes feels a little bit hidden. But then also, do you have vivid dreams? Because that's also Mercury in the 12th house could also lead to like your messages could come through in the unconsciousness as well.
They do a lot. Like, I find that I dream a lot about information or things, or I dream a lot about human design, actually, weirdly enough. And then in the morning, I'll like write things down, and then I cross-check them. And it's almost like I get these sort of dreaming downloads.
Yeah. I think you actually mentioned, we were talking about when we were choosing to talk about Mercury as a topic, and you're like, oh my word, I can't believe that this all like kind of has come to be. So that's crazy. So I think the bottom line for me is Mercury, again, I feel like don't be too hard on the planets. Mercury, even if you're born with a Mercury retrograde, that doesn't mean that your communication style is slow or dysfunctional. It's just learning to adapt to it and how we process information. I think it's just understanding and respecting that we all process information differently. And so those different styles, it's accepting our human design and our stars as they are, and working with that energy as you've been given it.
And also, if Mercury is not necessarily positioned in the throat, there might not be a clear and precise, concise articulation versus, an individual who might have it in the solar plexus where there's an emotional. So their voice of Mercury might be more of an emotional side that comes out. And like you were saying, you've got G center, you've got spleen. There might be also like, the way that it places itself in the head as well, and the gates that it's sort of touching.
And does Mercury, because we've talked about it, like, it activates in different centers, but can we talk about the throat just specifically? Because I think of the throat as communication. And the defined or undefined throat, how does that impact your Mercury or your communication?
Well, I guess, if I'm looking at it from myself, and I use a very simple example, I've got Mercury in the throat and I have a defined throat. And so my voice is more subjective. And for me to rather be subjective in my expression and my communication style is going to work better for me than to be collective or too objective.
Okay.
So, and I would say if an individual came to me and they also had Mercury in the throat, but they had an open throat, I would say, all right, let's look at being more collective, more objective in your expression, because the way that throat is either turned on or off, the communication can be heard and received in different ways. And that's kind of how I tackle it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I wonder if somebody that has an undefined throat, if they traveled to a Mercury line, I wonder if that would help them in some way communicate better. Thinking of astrogeography and how that fits in with it
would have to logically, because me moving to London to be on my Mars line, to work with career and to find purpose, and that whole reason why I made sort of the big move had to do with that. It was about being somewhere where I needed activation and I wasn't getting it where I was.
Yeah. And your Mars is in Virgo, which Virgo is, Mercury rules Virgo and Gemini. So that's that helps a little bit as well. Fascinating.
Yes, go look at your charts. That's what we always say. Look at your charts. We'll give you links. Look up your astrogeography. Look up your human design. It's so easy. Find the symbols, see where they're placed, a little investigation, and you can find out exactly how your communication style is. And it's totally unique.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying tuned. Subscribe, like, share, and spread the word.
Awesome. Definitely.
What's our tagline? We're going to
love you and leave you.
Love you and leave you. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.